plan to get to those at the end, unless there is something burning that you would like us to cover during the intro. And the last point to make is, if during this intro we use any abbreviations that make absolutely no sense, that are a shorthand for sort of a UN language, or some sort of a jargon, which we might use, not on purpose, but just sort of defaulted into, please put in the chat box a question as to what it is. Between the three of us, we will be sort of minding that and making sure that we pick it up and clarify. So these are a couple of housekeeping things. Now today, the first 10-15 minutes, we would like to cover four things with you. One is to tell you a little bit about the team that's on the call today, which isn't the full team, but just the three of us, so introducing the team. Two, a little bit about the initiative itself as to how it has come about and what it is all about. Three, we'll get a little bit into the profiles themselves. And four, some tips and tricks and the context to the process of recruitment and selection, which is one of the things we believe you guys are also super interested in it. So those four things we'd like to cover initially, and then get into Q&A. So with that in mind, there is three of us on the call today. You've heard from Cal already. He's our resident communications and partnership guru. Then we have Maria, our human resource whiz, who's going to give you quite a bit of context, background, and tips and tricks around the recruitment and process. And my name is Millie. I work as an innovation manager at Istanbul, covering Eurasian region, but for part-time also supporting UNDP administrators' corporate agenda on innovation. So that was point number one, just making sure that you guys know who is on the call today with you. Now, number two, talking a little bit about the Accelerator Lab initiative. One of the things that is not going to be a surprise to any of you is that we're seeing today trends and issues emerge that we haven't really seen over the last couple of years. Things that are really challenging our ability to deal with them. Anything from artificial intelligence and impact on labor market, to increasing effects of climate change and its impacts on anything from health and tourism to agriculture and food production. One of the really scary things that we are all seeing is that the speed at which these issues are taking place is very different and much faster from the ability of the organizations, be they private or public sector, to catch up with them. So if you look at the graph on the right, what this is saying is that the current approaches is really the menu of solutions that we currently have to deal with some of these issues, and the 21st century challenges, the risks that we're facing. And there is a gap there that we see, which is a relevance gap. We call it a relevance gap. And this is the place where we envision accelerator labs to play. Their function being able to close that relevance gap and make a dialed move on some of these big issues. And just to be a little bit less nebulous and more concrete, if you consider the issue of migration, which is something that we have seen throughout decades and centuries, people have migrated. One of the things that we're seeing today, largely driven by the changing climate and environmental factors, is projections that we might look at the world that will move from having 70 million people who are forcefully displaced to about 250 million over the next couple of years as a result of climate change. Now, in that context of having 500 million people being forcefully moved from their homes someplace else, this raises a number of questions to which we don't yet have an intelligent answer. For example, what does the justice system look like in the context when a family in one country is having to relocate from their home for reasons that might have come from people living outside that country? Right? What is the education system? What does the healthcare system look like in the context where we have 250 million people forcefully displaced and being made to move from country A from country B? Again, something like this is an issue that we don't have a template from our past that helps us deal with it. It's something that we need to come up and work out on the go. And while that's happening, while we're working out what the potential solutions are, the world isn't really stopping. The changing climate isn't stopping. So the ground keeps shifting between our feet, again, making that relevance gap all the more striking. This is the place where we would like Accelerator, UNDP network of accelerator labs, to play. Now, at this point in time, you might be wondering, why UNDP? This will be at this point in time, the largest global network of accelerator labs looking into issues of development. There are a couple of things to note here, which we hope would be an exciting draw for you to want to be a part of what we're talking about. First of all, UNDP is an organization of about 18,000 people present in about 170 countries, and as such has unprecedented amount of scale and relationships and partnerships to which it can bring to bear to some of these issues at hand. So scale and relationships is one. The second aspect is the lab that you would be working in is a part of the network of 60, which again is the largest network of these structures looking in development. And the third aspect here is you would be part of the cohort of 180 new staff that we're onboarding into the organization that have very, very niche skills and expertise. That our intuition is when they're put together with more mainstream expertise that UNDP has, might give us a chance to close that relevance gap. The last point to make around why UNDP is an exciting place, because when you think of innovation, you might think of Silicon Valley, or you might think of Shanghai. You may not necessarily think of a public sector organization or UNDP. UNDP has worked on the innovation agenda for the last couple of years, but we have really seen the quantum leap forward starting middle of last year, when our new strategic plan came into the effect, where innovation is at the very heart of everything that we do, both from the perspective of policies and program, but also equally as important in the operation and back office. And what this is communicating is the organizational intent to have a UNDP that will change in step with the world outside it. So not only the type of programs and policies that we're putting out, but also if we talk about operations and back office support, the way we look as an organization needs to be very different if we are to engage with some of these issues. So the Accelerator Lab network is one manifestation of that organizational intent to be more agile, to be more disruptive, to have solutions and initiatives that are on same par with the scope and scale of challenges that we are having to deal with. And the last point to make is this initiative comes from the very top of the organization. It is backed and endorsed by the administrator of the UNDP, who has listened to the feedback from the ground, from our country offices, and put in place this ambitious initiative that we're talking to you guys about. Now, how are the accelerator labs supposed to work? And again, they're not set up yet. You guys are on the call because you're interested, presumably, to apply and be part of the network. A couple of things to say here. We believe that there are three comparative advantages to the network, at least in the way that we have been designing and conceptualizing of it today. One is accelerated learning. And the reason we believe that the design of the network is done premised on this is that if you take as the truth that the trends outside the organization and outside the public sector are moving at such breakneck speed, very few organizations will be able to deal with those changes in real time. So the premium really the focus gets put on the organization's ability to learn and to make sense of these emerging trends. If you consider that close to 75% of citizens in the world today live in the cities, the trend of urbanization, what does that mean for food production? What does that mean when you add into a mix the changing climate? A number of questions around this trend of urbanization are left unanswered simply because we cannot catch up with the changes that we're seeing on the ground. So the network itself is premised on very rapid learning, both on the country level, but also by being a part of this learning network of 60. This is one. Two, a greater breadth of solutions. This one comes from our efforts to really study and spend quite a bit of time learning from policy labs, both outside and inside UNDP, in private sector and public. One of the defining features of this initiative is that our intuition is that we need to be really premised on local solutions, solutions coming from the communities themselves. And what we mean by that is not crowdsourcing, not necessarily public participation and collecting people's voices, but going after citizens who live in the most extreme conditions, those who live in the extreme poverty, those whose houses get flooded 10, 15 times a year, those who may not have the privilege of sitting around and waiting for UNDP or the government to solve their problems, but are having to cope themselves. How do we get to those individuals and get their solutions to inform the way policies are done? This is comparative advantage number 2, and you will see how this then translates into functions and roles of the lab. The third one is the ability to bridge the scale. And what we mean by that is that the responsibility of the accelerator lab teams is several-fold here. One, they are an integral part of UNDP country office in each of these 60 countries. And what that implies is that UNDP country office in many of these places have been around for a couple of years, if not a couple of decades, which means the offices have very, very contextual insight into the context of a particular country, have worked on and built up relationships with government and many other partners. And the Accelerator Lab is meant to bring to bear a different lens to the issues that the office has been working on. In doing so, the lab has a responsibility to bridge both the ongoing, the mainstream, and the disruptive work that they will be bringing to bear. The second aspect of this bridge to scale also implies that in all of these countries, there is already an existing network and ecosystem around social innovation, around research and university and academia and what have you. We expect the labs to make a bridge between that ecosystem, between the UNDP country office and the clients that we serve, in order to identify and create mechanisms for scale for the work that they will be doing. Now, if we take that one step forward, how does that actually map out into what types of functions and profiles are we looking to have inside each of these labs? And here, as you well know, we're looking for 3 profiles. The first one, the head of exploration, is what we expect from this person is to have endless curiosity and sort of undying thirst to look out and identify under the radar organizations, individuals, solutions, approaches that are taking a very different tack at issues that we're facing. And in this way, the lab will be able to contribute to the work of the UNDP country office by putting together the mainstream and the disruptive. So here, an example that one example that might be illustrative is there was a recent article around using bacteria on different products that get shipped from one place to another to be able to trace the point of origin, right? So for example, if you buy a pair of shoes in, say, Bangalore, those shoes must have come from someplace else. And as they move around from different places, they pick up different bacteria. So you can actually track that footprint to be able to understand where do those shoes come from, in a way helping you understand the supply and value chain far faster than that is done in a more traditional way. So the head of exploration would be somebody who would be in touch with an organization who has come up with a way and is currently testing this type of an approach to understand value chains across different industries. Second, if you look at the head of solutions mapping, my personal favorite, totally biased here, is that we're looking for this individual to spend quite a bit of time in the communities, looking for those citizens who are living in extreme conditions and coming up with solutions to their own problems. An example here that we've recently comes from Bangladesh, which floods very frequently every year. And when the rains come, the farmlands the farms get flooded as well, cutting families off from the source of food and the source of income as well. So what the farmers have done is they've built these floating farms that as the rain comes and the water levels rises, so do the farms with them. In other words, flooding no longer in the villages where this has started happening impact families' ability to grow food and use that food to sell it in the market and generate income. So we expect the head of solution mapping to be able to identify citizens and group of citizens who have found solutions to their problems and be able to connect them and sort of tease out principles from those solutions that can impact policies in the larger system. Lastly, the head of experimentation is somebody who we expect to be able to structure a portfolio of experiments, portfolio of initiatives that build both on what the head of exploration has done, what the head of solutions mapping has done, but also what is happening currently in the UNDP country office, in the ecosystem around, into a set of initiatives that would be run parallel to address a given problem. So if we take, and this is my last slide before handing it over to Maria around recruitment topics, if we put all of this together, we've kind of mapped out a spectrum of behaviors and approaches that will help us move from more standard and default behaviors that we see today to those that we believe we should be able to demonstrate in order to close that relevance gap. So if you study, if you've done any type of project management setting, you will have been acquainted with log frames, right? Log frames are premised on, a very logical, sequential, linear world in which inputs are predictable, and with them, so are the outputs. Our assumption here is that we live in a very different world that's very messy, where the ground keeps shifting underneath your feet, and where you continually need to put a focus on, again, learning to be able to know how to shift your processes and your approaches. And again, organization that works very well in a logical, sequential world may not necessarily be the best fit one to work in a messy world. Right? And this is where we would like Accelerator Labs to, through their work, be able to also map out how do organizations like UNDP need to tweak and adapt to have a better fit with the type of solution issues that we're working on. Related to that, the empirical evidence tells us that if your organization is premised on learning from pilots that take 1 to 2 years to be implemented, you will continually be behind the curve, because within that 1 to 2 years, as you're studying from a single pilot, again, the world is changing. Issues are moving on. And if you're stuck in that single pilot, you will be behind the curve. Now, we would like Accelerator Labs to move that process more towards far faster feedback loops of learning, where we reduce that 1 to 2 year cycle into weeks to a month, where we can continually keep learning and iterating through the portfolio of experiments and addressing our issues. Again, connected to that, this implies a move away from, if you've studied and are familiar with the venture capitalist model, where a bunch of startups start competing for some funding and they become part of the funnel that goes down, where a single startup, a unicorn, goes through the couple of rounds of funding and becomes the one that gets the most, that can then focus on investing in a given product. In a messy, shifting world, we believe that this quest for this funnel, the quest for unicorns, again, is going to lock us into a particular path where we might be blindfolded by both the changes happening outside, but also new potential solutions. So we'd like to see a shift towards a portfolio of potential solutions that we would be running in parallel continually, both learning about the problem, learning what works and what doesn't, so we can change and tweak both solutions themselves, but also the way that we work. 2 more aspects here. Again, best practices is something that's a very legitimate method at learning from the past, learning about what has worked in the last year or last few years as a way to inform what happens next. And that in itself, again, is a legitimate way to make sure that what we have done previously, that we know what we know, that we know what we have learned. However, if we premise our future actions solely on best practices, again, we're going to be at the disconnect with the pace of changes happening outside. So with accelerator labs, we would also like to move and complement that with learning from local solutions. If we are able to identify citizens who are coping with drivers of migration and climate change and inequality today, being able to put those with historically relevant best practices might give us the best chance to come up with better solutions. Last point to make, there are many, social innovation lab space is a growing field still. Private sector, public sector, foundations, we have seen probably not as much as there could be linking between those labs. And in not linking them into a coherent network where this fast learning can happen, there might be missed opportunities for that learning. And this is why by having a globally integrated network in 60 labs, which we as UNDP hope to extend to all program countries, we hope to be able to tap into collective intelligence of the whole and be able, again, to learn, to be the organization who can learn the fastest about these emerging trends as to be able to turn them into value and intelligence that governments and other partners can use. So with this in mind, we have gone through our team, we have gone through what this initiative is all about, the profiles and how the labs work. And now I turn it over to Maria, who will tell you a little bit about the process of recruitment and selection. Maria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Millie, and hello everybody from New York. So after this very enthusiastic dive into the exciting Accelerator Labs project, I think it's quite clear what we're trying to convey is that we're not looking for the traditional profiles that UNDP or the UN system at large usually attracts. We're not necessarily looking for someone with 20, 25 years of very strong technical experience, that has prior UN experience, or that is familiar or very familiar with the UN, having worked with us in some role previously. We're not even looking neither for someone who's well connected within the UN, that has a network within UNDP. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for instead is someone with a strong sense of purpose and commitment. We're looking for someone, and these are some of the things that Millie already covered, that is someone curious, that wants to learn, that wants to dig and go and find what's out there, that is open to discovery and exploration, pragmatic, constructive. So there are very little minimum requirements that we do need to make sure that are covered. The reason why we've done this like this is because we want to reduce any barriers to entry. We want to know who's out there, who you are, who's interested in joining us. We want to get to know you better without limiting ourselves to the kind of profiles that we would want to attract. Now, as I mentioned, there are some minimum requirements that we needed to respect. One of them, and I think it's a very important one to mention, is that only candidates that are nationals or that have the citizenship of the country where the accelerator labs, the countries where the accelerator labs are being created, can be considered for most of these positions. I say most because there's one country office, Fiji, that is a multi-country office, and as such, for that country office, the position has been created as an international UN volunteer position, which means anybody can apply. But for all the other ones, these are national officer positions, and because of the staff category that this is, they can only be open to nationals, as I said, nationals or people holding the citizenship of the country in question. What to focus on in terms of job descriptions to understand whether you would be a good fit or not for any of these positions. And I say any of these positions because if you're from country A, say you're from Mexico, and you're interested in two or all three of these positions in Mexico, feel free to apply to all three, okay? It's not either or. You're free to apply and we will consider your application. What you do need to look at, however, are, and I go back to the minimum requirements. So look in the vacancy announcement. Well, what is the educational minimum requirements and the number of experience, number of years of experience? That is it. Everything else that is listed as desirable or an asset or good to have additional skill or attitude or educational background and experience, that's what it is. Nice to have. If you have it, great. If you don't, we will still consider you. I go back again to the point of we do not want to have any barriers to whom we're able to hire. So if you're interested and you meet the minimum requirements, do apply. We're interested in getting to know you better. We're interested in you. Some of the questions we've had previously were related to how to better make the application interesting or more appealing to us. Inform yourself. So I think it's fantastic that you're part of this conversation today. Please do as much research as you can in addition to this webinar. Go into the UNDP website, go into the Accelerator Labs landing page website, go through the job description, through the vacancy announcement of the position or positions that you're interested in, and pick up as much information about the context, the project, the organization as you can. Because the best advice that I can give you is make sure that, to, of course, the extent possible, that your profile matches and speaks to what we're looking. And that's my best advice to you. Just do that homework of putting yourselves, communicating. That's what it is. It's about communication. You want to communicate who you are, speaking to the terms of what we're looking for. Two last points. All the questions that we've been receiving in the past have been related to the salaries and allowances for these positions. All UN salaries are public. So please keep an eye on the chat box, because I will be sharing the link to the UN salaries and allowances, where you will be able to select the country that you're interested in and what the salaries are and the conditions. I will also be sharing an email address that you can use to email us any question that you may have related to the Accelerator Labs, including recruitment process. We might not necessarily have the answer. We might need to redirect you to the country office in question, because the recruitment processes are being driven by the country offices themselves. But we will tend to your email. We will answer your email. You will get an answer. So with this said, I think we can open it up for questions.
Thanks, Maria. So I'm just going to pull out one question, actually, that is directly related to you or your segment from Sean, which is, can citizens with a working visa in the country apply to the position? Or maybe it's, can people with a working visa in that country apply to a position?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a very valid question. Unfortunately, and this relates to how UNDP is settled or is present in a given country, and the kind of agreements that we have with the host countries. Unfortunately, for those that are not nationals, that is not an option. Meaning, it's not enough to have a work permit. It's not enough to have a visa to work in the country. You need to be a holder of a passport or be entitled to having a passport from that given country.
Fantastic. I'm going to bring Millie back in. Welcome back, Millie. Okay. So we've got a couple of questions here. One person has, Alejandro has asked, I believe that I have the skills for all three of the positions. Can I apply for all three of them?
Sure, I would say apply. In your cover letter, it would be good to justify where do you see, what is the angle from your previous experience, the projects that you have worked on that make you a good fit for the three. This is my personal advice. I would maybe consider 1 out of 3 that you feel you are maybe a little bit better fit for than the other 2, and maybe indicate that. And by having country offices conduct these interviews for all three positions at the same time, the country offices would be looking not just for hiring for specific niche capabilities, but also for dynamics between the team members as well. So these are a couple of things that we would be looking for.
Great. Tamaisha asks, are we looking for individuals to be participants in the lab, or are we looking to find solutions from those individuals and then get another party to develop the solutions? I think that's what Tamaisha is asking.
Okay, so again, the core team of the lab will be 3 people. And by core team, we mean you guys will be hired on a contract, work for UNDP country office, and have certain duties and responsibilities to fulfill as heads of exploration, experimentation, and solution mapping. Through doing your work, you are likely to grow the network of individuals and organizations who will come on this journey with you, or who you will go on the journey with. So from that perspective, I think depending on how you define a sort of part of the lab, if you guys are a core team, chances are you'll have a number of other partners who will be loosely or in different ways connected to the lab and who will have different roles or responsibilities around it. I hope that answers the question.
And Millie, like, what if we take the question from the perspective of solutions mapping? Like those, so in solutions mapping, we go find individuals that have potential solutions. Are they the ones who are, growing those solutions themselves, like maybe like you'd see in a typical accelerator program, or is it another group that might be developing those solutions and doing something with them?
Sure, that's a really good point, Cal. Thank you. So from that perspective, should you find a farmer or a group of farmers who came up with floating farms in Bangladesh, right? Chances are these individuals, at least from research and evidence that we have so far, really have very little interest to scale their solutions, to do an awareness raising campaign around them, or to turn them into a business. They're simply being moved from the experience of having to solve their own problem. If this holds true in countries where you guys would be working, then the role of the lab and the country office as a broader sort of player here would be to build a system and a scaling mechanism where that solution can inform a policy and a system in that particular field. In this case, disaster risk/agriculture field, but also potentially build an ecosystem where there might be a private sector route that can be tapped into and be used as a scaling mechanism for this. So floating farms for the world, if you will.
Great. Tamaisha also asks, is UN experience a detriment to the application?
No, interesting question. No, we, on one side, we don't expect you to have relationships and experience in the UN to be competitive for these positions, right? One. Also, should you have them, this is not going to be counted obviously against you. What I think Maria has already focused on is that, these profiles are very new for us. And we know that the whole process of recruitment and selection needs to be fit for recruiting for those capabilities. So chances are that that process is not going to look the same as a more traditional UNDP process that we have in the organization today, simply because we are hiring for different roles and capabilities. We are not able to tell you what that is going to look like today, but maybe in a week when we do another round of these calls, we might be able to share some more information on this.
Fantastic. Marcia has a question about, I think it's a 2-part question. So one part is, where does quality fit into this whole picture, right? We're talking about how we need to have speed and we need to iterate. Where does quality fit in? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is kind of around this challenge that actually building a culture of innovation takes a really long time, or something that takes time, right? And so how do we plan on bridging that gap?
I'm just writing them down to make sure that I don't have to ask Cal pesky questions to repeat part of the question. Okay, so on the quality bit, depends on how you define quality. What we have seen so far is that being defaulted into the world is predictable. If we only do A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z will happen, does not work. While that type of a process gives us a sense of comfort that, oh, we know how to live in this world, or we really pretend to know how to live in this world, we're not really making the dial move on some of the big systemic systemic issues. So from that perspective, if you look at quality from the perspective of how do we put UNDP in a position to learn really, really fast about what does the urbanization trend in Latin America mean for inequality? What does it mean for spatial planning? What does it mean for violence in the cities? What is the interplay of these various different drivers, and how do they translate into better policies? If that is the quality, this is what we're going after. Again, in all of these countries, UNDP country offices already exist with decades of relationship building and work in the development sector and expertise around agriculture and urban planning and disaster risk reduction. If you look at these profiles, we're not hiring for agricultural engineer. We're hiring for a very different set of capabilities that we hope will complement the more substantive work that is already happening in UNDP country offices. So in this sense, speed of learning and ability to translate that learning into policy options is the quality that we're looking for. The second part around culture of innovation, there is a poster that Cal has put together for one of these positions that says, we move fast and break things. That's what got us here. But now we want to move fast and fix things. So with having, we cannot underscore enough what it means to bring on board a cohort of 180 people into the organization across 60 countries with these niche profiles. So if we talk about building a culture of innovation, onboarding these 180 people in country offices that are already there is going to be a jolt in the system already, where one of the biggest aspects that we will have to make sure is that there is a bridge between the accelerator lab type of work and leveraging that to support the substantive work that already happens in a country office.
Great. Thanks, Millie. So Judith asks, is UNDP becoming an agile, capital A, organization? And if you don't mind, I'll just take this one.
Sure.
So we are applying agile project management approaches in different parts of the organization. And so, for example, as part of the Accelerator Labs Network Hub, so this core team that is helping launch these labs, we're doing things like weekly retrospectives, and we're operating in kind of a sprint format. So in terms of the adoption of Agile, we're starting to see that in different parts of the organization. But I think the undercurrent behind all of this and the strategic plan and the direction from the top of the organization in terms of the change that needs to happen is that we need to have greater agility as an organization, right? So I want to distinguish between agile project management and kind of organizational agility. Organizational agility definitely being pursued across the board. And then we're seeing agile project management approaches pop up in different places.
Cal, I think you can also pick up on that vein a question that just came in from Marcia around how will UNDP keep the 180 innovators onboarded in this accelerator connected?
Yeah, that's a super question. So we have outlined a couple of different ways for this group to work together. So they're across 60 countries, which is, of course, a really big challenge. How do we keep all of these people connected and learning from each other and ensuring that as soon as a lab in one country learns something, that of the other labs can kind of take advantage of that knowledge? And there are a few different ways. So one of them is essentially everyone is connected on the same kind of Slack-like platform. So we're actually using Microsoft Teams, which I have to say is just as good a product as Slack. We use both. We use both, to be honest. But everyone's going to be on that. And so you have channels on kind of topics like exploration and solutions mapping, where all of the experts in exploration, all of the experts in solution mapping can ask each other questions, can share articles and learnings from the work projects that they're working on. Another approach is on a monthly basis, we're going to be getting people in different parts of the network to interview each other as kind of post-mortem interviews. So it's not going to be about creating tons of paperwork and documentation on a regular basis. It's more about how do we create weekly reflections? How do we elevate some of those weekly reflections for use by the rest of the network? And then how do we kind of interview each other so that we can surface that knowledge, record it, and make it available to lots of people? There are a number of things that we're going to be doing on the level, on the on the level of keeping these 60 different teams connected. And I think it'll be some experimentation as well. But I just wanted to tell you about a few of the initial ones. Sorry, I'm going back to the questions now.
Sorry, Cal, I put you on the spot, but I know you get pretty excited about the organizational learning side of things. So,
let's see here. Do you know how this works with the CARICOM Treaty, where CARICOM nationals can live and work anywhere in the Caribbean?
You know, I don't have an answer to that, but I promise we will get back. We will investigate and get back to you. Maria, I don't know if you have an answer to it. I certainly don't.
I don't necessarily have a specific answer to the CARICOM Treaty and how that impacts our ability to hire non-nationals of the specific country within the treaty. My tendency would be to believe that we cannot, regardless of the agreements in between countries. But if whomever posted the question could share their email address with us, or email us after the webinar, so then we can reply to that person after we actually do look into it with our Latin American and the Caribbean team colleagues.
Super, great. Can you tell us about the plan to create the culture of the labs being a new national/international team? That's from Juan.
I'm going to take a stab at the answer based on what I understand is being asked. So my hunch here is what is the culture between Accelerator Lab, which will be all national, and presumably country office, which might be part international, maybe. The truth of the matter is that in most of our UNDP country offices, predominantly staff is national. We have very few internationals to begin with. So from this perspective, getting the two to gel, we don't necessarily see it as an issue.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a big investment in creating a learning culture around this as well. So whereas kind of traditionally the approach might have been that people were really just focused on their own projects and they didn't have the time to spend a lot of to invest a lot in reflecting and learning and applying learnings. We're really focusing on ensuring that there is a culture of weekly learning and improvement across all of the 60 teams. That's going to be really important for this to operate as a globally integrated network. Basil asks, how long is the hiring process expected to take after the applications have been submitted? And what's the expected starting date?
Yes, so UNDP in general, it does take us around 3 months from application to decision. Now, for these accelerator labs, we're also trying to accelerate the recruitment process and the hiring process. And what is envisioned is that candidates, selected candidates, will join the organization in May 2019. So in 3 months from now. That said, I don't know if I earlier mentioned that each country office is conducting their own recruitment processes. So the timelines will not necessarily be the same for all. But as I said, the goal is to have everybody on board in May.
Great. And then someone, Sergio, was wondering whether having public sector experience or corporate sector experience was at all a hindrance.
No, it's not. Over to Millie.
Yes, no, absolutely. A very short answer to that is absolutely not.
No. Yeah. Can we apply both for our home country and Fiji?
I think going back to what Maria said, you would have to be a national in both places.
No, not Fiji. Fiji is an international UN volunteer position. So Fiji is open to any international interested candidate. So I think the question was, can you apply for your own country? So a country where you're a national of and Fiji, the answer would be yes.
Okay. Tamaisha, you had a question where you asked, is it more entrepreneur focused or more organizationally focused? And then you wrote, okay, this makes sense. Let us know if we haven't answered your question. Lorena, could it be an expected solution to implement on the national level a system that prioritizes problems on machine learning experience? So I think the idea here is it possible that a lab would kind of focus on machine learning as a subject area and try to scale those solutions nationally?
My hunch on this is to say that the issues that labs will be working on will be very much context specific and driven by priorities that UNDP country office is working on together with their partners. So to what extent machine learning can be used to scale, it is going to be very much context specific. If you've got specific ideas about this, and we'll have an opportunity to be invited on some sort of a long or short listing, we definitely encourage you to be as forthcoming with ideas and venues and directions that the labs can take, because this also signals the initiative in thinking about how you see lab working in this context.
Marcelo asks, can you tell us a little bit more about the experimentation position and what are some of the main tasks that person will be doing?
Okay, so quickly, we are looking, so the experimentation, everybody's into really fast learning, right? But if we can sort of hone in into one of the three profiles around accelerated learning, that would be an individual who will be responsible for structuring the portfolio of experiments. Because on one side, that person will be building on what the exploration and solution mapping colleagues are doing. But at the same time, that person will be putting in place a system through which once we start implementing the sort of solutions in the portfolio, how do we learn what works, what doesn't? What does success look for 10, 15, 20 parallel solutions in place? How do we know that we need to kill some off and invest into new ones? These are some of the things that we will be looking for from the experimentation lead.
Great. Nicholas asks, what is the plan to ensure the continuity of the accelerator labs at the end of the 3-year initiative?
Sure. So two answers to that question. One of them is for us organizationally, for UNDP, provided success, the functions of the accelerator labs is something that we see as becoming a core bread and butter DNA of the way UNDP works. So, in a very pedestrian way to translate that is we don't have another project being designed before we have gone out and identified 10, 15, 20 people who have already solved their own problems in this space, right? So this is one aspect of sustainability. The other aspect of sustainability is that we would envisage that labs themselves with the core team would use this seed investment that's going to be given to every lab to come up with the most fitting home, if you will, for the lab itself moving on after 3 years. This might be a spin-off into an organization of the public sector. It might be a spin-off into academia or research. It might be a spin-off into private sector.
Great. Gonzalo asks, are there specific technologies or methodologies that will come as an advantage when he applies?
So one thing that we're very clear is that accelerator labs are not premised on looking at technology as a solution to the problems, right? We know that technology will always likely be a part of a solution. So from that perspective, if you can demonstrate that capabilities that you have around using certain technologies within different functions, that is more than welcome. Just to give you a very, very quick example, we are working with a team out of Ipsos on using big data to identify lead users. They have done a proof of study around kite surfing, right? And the premise here is that lead users, in addition to sort of innovating to solve their own problems, also talk about what they do. And when they talk about what they do, they go online and do that. So we can use big data to sort of identify their issues of privacy, obviously, that we cannot go beyond, but we get to the communities. So this would be an example that if you're well versed into machine learning and big data analysis, you can actually make a link between the two, for example.
And I would just add to that I think the stronger advantage beyond any, kind of bringing any specific skill sets or knowledge of methodologies like human-centered design, project work and the ability to demonstrate kind of innovation projects that you've worked on are going to be really strong advantages in the hiring process.
Mm.
Ferhana asks, I saw that the Caribbean Accelerator Lab will be based in Barbados. Does this mean that this particular team will be working with UNDP country teams across the Caribbean?
So Barbados is the focus, is the core country. The office right now is identifying what the scope of the work of the operations of the lab will be. But right now we are sort of premised on having it be a country specific lab.
Great. Biblioteca asks, I have a multidisciplinary background in ecological, social, and economics, and so I might be able to apply to all three of the positions, but I only see a few disciplines like psychology, anthropology, architecture, design, and the social sciences. And this person also has many years of work implementing the SDGs. So I guess the question is, we have those kind of example. What are types of people that might apply for the jobs on the website? Is that the only thing that we're looking for?
So that's a very good question, and the three of us had a conversation about this before the call, where you will notice that the years of experience we try to keep purposefully low, not because the expectations and the level of these positions is necessarily junior, but because we wanted to reduce barriers to entry to all potential candidates who are a good fit for these positions. In other words, what we will be really interested in during the recruitment process is what is the fit between the practical projects that you've worked on with the needs of a particular profile and the country office itself.
Great. Gabby Rios asks, in some countries, I've explicitly seen them encourage designers to apply, but not in Mexico. Is it a barrier for the Mexican office if I am a designer?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So again, being able to demonstrate how the experience that you have working on different projects suggests you as a good candidate for some of the capabilities across the three roles. This is what we will be looking for.
And this person also asks, they're asking for people with previous experience in budgeting and spending, performance analysis, since that's related to the local agenda. Is that really an essential requirement?
I can't, to be perfectly honest with you. Okay, Maria. Maria might have an answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did develop standard job descriptions for all these positions, but then we allowed each country office to add in there anything that would be context specific that they felt it was important to have in the job description. Now, none of it would be an essential requirement. I would, in any case, advise that you go back to the vacancy announcement and read through it. If it's a minimum requirement, it will say that it is a minimum requirement, but because of the approach that we take, I'm 99% sure that it's not an essential requirement, and it would be beneficial to have it, but not essential.
Great. And Maria, one more thing. Someone is asking Tamaisha is asking whether applications will be reviewed by the country office to which they're applying, or if they're reviewed by an international team.
It will be a mixed team. We of course need to have the country office represented throughout the recruitment process, because we need to make sure that the candidates also speak to the specific needs and context in which the position that they're applying for. But there will be a very strong international component to the processes.
Great. Let's see here. Looks like we're doing a pretty good job with answering these questions. I think we've covered a lot of them. I'm just looking for anything that we might not have covered. So we have two questions here. Carmen Escobar asks, who are the potential clients for the lab?
So that will, again, I'm sorry I'm being a little bit boring with this answer, but it will very much be driven by the particular policy issue that gets chosen in a country. So for example, if we're looking at impacts on climate change and tourism and agriculture in Rwanda, we will be going to communities that are involved in tourism and involved in food production and agriculture in that country to look for lead users, because we want to be able to make the dial move and improve the overall situation within which they work and live. But at the same time, we want to be able to take those experiences and translate them into a change in a policy and a system that might make the entire context more favorable for other industries as well. So again, it will be my ability to give you examples might be a little bit disconnected from the reality. As we move forward, as the country offices start agreeing policy issues for labs to work in, this is going to start having a much better fit with the reality.
The only thing I would add to that is also because UNDP works very closely with the government in each country, many of the labs will be working with government in some way to speed up the development of potential approaches to a challenge that government is interested in addressing, or some part of government is interested in addressing. For example, we've got 5 new messages here. Let's have a look. Will you be bringing the 180 people together for a week in one location to kick off this project?
Really good question. So we're balancing costs with the need to build a team of teams. What we're considering doing right now is to get us kicked off region-based cohorts. So we have 7 labs in Latin America. We have 10 labs in Arab states, 6 labs in Eurasia, 10 labs in Asia Pacific, and 27 labs in Africa, right? So we will do regional cohorts for all regions except Africa. In Africa, we're likely to split the cohort of 27 into 3 cohorts of 9 to get us kicked off. Ideally, we would like to obviously have everybody in the same room at some point in time. It would be quite impactful, I believe. But again, having to balance issues of cost and optics and profile and overall fun that would be had by having 180 of you guys in the same room.
Great. I'm gonna take 2 more questions since we are coming to the close of the hour. Pong asks, is there a potential for the labs to extend to other countries?
So accelerator labs are seen as an integral capability of UNDP country office. So at this point in time, we're looking at them as country-based capabilities. That said, UNDP works on issues that are sub-regional in nature. So if you think of Sahel crisis in Africa, for example, right? So as we move forward with this thinking and as the labs start hitting the ground running and as we start learning what works, what doesn't, we might consider setting up labs that address an issue that's sub-regional in the context, that goes beyond borders of a single country.
And Millie, just to add to that question, do you see that maybe there will be labs in countries beyond the 60?
Absolutely. So the intention of UNDP Administrator is that accelerator labs should be a dedicated capability in all countries where UNDP has its operation. So in a way, being connected to the initial cohort of 60 really gives you an opportunity to influence a much broader global agenda here.
Yeah. In other words, this is a big deal at UNDP.
Yes, I'm very biased, so yes, very much so.
Okay, and the last question I'm going to take is from Eliza. Eliza asks, is there any way for us to stay connected with the accelerator labs from Chile? And I think, in general, if you're interested in connecting with the accelerator labs beyond just employment, there is a section at the bottom of the accelerator labs website where you can drop us a note to contact us. And just write in, what is your interest, where you're from, and leave your contact information. This section is really helpful for us because if you email us 2 months, 3 months down the line when we're kind of thinking, oh, where was that person in Chile, that we should have talked to, it's going to be really hard to find that email. And so this helps us keep kind of all of the potential people who are interested in partnering or staying involved or volunteering or maybe even interning with accelerator labs in one place so that we can find that information. So unfortunately, we don't have any more time to answer questions. It's been really wonderful spending the hour with you. It's great great questions. I absolutely love the energy that we've had from everyone. If you have a question that you still want answered, but that you haven't had the chance to get an answer to, just email accelerator.labs@undp.org, and we'll post that into the chat, and we'll get you an answer by email. In the meantime, we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Tell your friends about the Accelerator Labs as well. You know, we'd love to get their kind of applications or their interest in these positions as well. This is a really big challenge, and we need to get some of the best talent available to help us run these labs. And that's all. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Cheers.